Hey guys, Mr. Happy here and welcome to Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn Bestiary. Evasion has been pretty much remade from the top down and a lot of new creatures have begun appearing around the world. Now while some of them might be common recurrences in the Final Fantasy theme and some of them might be brand new, our goal is to look at the history behind each of these creatures and figure out just how they got to this point in Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn. This episode, we're going to be talking about the Cactuar, and the Cactuar is one of my favorite creatures to talk about because it is one of the most iconic Final Fantasy features that has been going on for over a decade now. Its origin is actually a very interesting one too. It actually originated back when Tetsuya Nomura was in high school, and it was simply a doodle that he drew in his high school notebook. Just goes to show you that any doodle could become a very iconic video game character if you're adamant enough about it. Now, when they first originated back in Final Fantasy VI, which was their first appearance, they were actually not called Cactuars, they were commonly called Cactrots. And since then, they've taken on so many different names, including the very famous Cactuar, Cactoids, Cactites, Sabotenders, plus many other names that they've taken on for more specific roles. Now, since their original appearance in Final Fantasy VI, they have appeared in every single Final Fantasy to date. Now, I don't say that with any sort of exaggeration. I went through literally every single Final Fantasy. Even some other games that aren't Final Fantasy related, some Mario games, of course, they've made an appearance in Kingdom Hearts. It just goes to show you just how iconic the figure is. But with that out of the way, let's go into some of their traits. Now, their traits have pretty much varied throughout different games. While they have taken on similar forms and they have taken on similar names, some of them do vary from time to time. The first thing to note is that their form, the way that they stand, is actually very similar to and excuse my pronunciation, a haniwa, which is a clay figure made for rituals and funerals in Japan, which is very interesting. It goes to show you that maybe he just had a little bit of some motivation there with that figure. Now, like I said, they do have varying traits, and one of their biggest varying traits is their size. Cactuars are usually either extremely small or way larger than the player, depending on what kind of Cactuar you're dealing with. Now, while sometimes size does matter, they are a threatening creature regardless. And in a few games, Cactuars are actually about the same size as the characters. I know Final Fantasy XI, the Sabotenders were something bigger than some characters and around the same size of other characters, but for the most part, they're either extremely small or extremely large. Now, one of their other most important traits is that they actually have extremely high evasion, and they are very, very fast. This can actually be seen in Final Fantasy XI, where a monster is so fast that no matter what the player does, they cannot keep up the speed with the Cactuar. Even the biggest Cactuars are usually extremely fast, and this can be seen in Final Fantasy XIII as a very noticeable way of looking at it, where a Gigantor, which is the biggest Cactuar that there is, runs across the field at unbelievable speeds. You wish you could move that quickly on a Chocobo in that game. They usually have fairly low HP compared to other monsters. Even some of the more notable ones have lower HP than some of their maybe other enemy counterparts around the same level. But they usually have medium to high defense to make up for it, so the challenge with them usually becomes surviving their extremely powerful attacks while trying to deal with their extremely low HP and their extremely high defense. Now, their behavior is also something that we should talk about because that also varies more from game to game, not so much from game to game, but more from Cactuar to Cactuar. While most lesser Cactuars are usually aggressive, some of them tend to show signs of fear. They tend to use hit and run tactics where they'll hit an enemy and run away. They'll try and do some damage, but they are not really up for dying most of the time. So it does go to show you that while some of them can be brave, some of them can also be extremely cowardly. While the lesser Cactuars usually attack people that walk by, some of the more notable ones, such as the Gigantor or the Cactrot Rapido from Final Fantasy XI, actually tend to only be provoked when their territory is invaded or they see another Cactuar being attacked. Now, like I said, some Cactuars tend to run away, and their speed makes it very easy to do. Now, the next thing that we should probably talk about, if I could get my notes in order, would be their signature moves. Their signature moves are very, very simple to talk about. They have one called Needle Shot, which is essentially their single needle shot that does usually moderate damage, less damage though than their other signature moves. Their main signature move is actually called 1000 Needles, and this again originated back in Final Fantasy VI. However, it wasn't originally called 1000 Needles. The original attack was actually called Blowfish, which it was a very similar animation. It was very similar meaning, and this attack even made an appearance in Final Fantasy V before the Cactuar made an appearance. So it's pretty interesting to see how 1000 Needles eventually grew to be 1000 Needles. Now, there are very many variations on this attack, the weakest one being 100 Needles, and the strongest one that at least I've seen being 99,999 Needles. This is usually in games such as Final Fantasy XIII, where you can break the HP limit and therefore 10,000 needles, the other version of it, just doesn't seem to have any impact when you have 30,000 HP, unless you're getting hit by maybe 3 of them at the same time. So other than that, there are different variations. In Final Fantasy XI, you could find anywhere between 1,000 and 10,000, 9,000, 8,000, 7,000. Any of those could appear, but only on very special Cactuars, usually in very special areas, so it wasn't a very common occurrence. Now, some other very interesting information about the Cactuar. In certain games that are capable of being summoned, now they've been in so many games, I'm not going to say which games they're summoned in, but I know Final Fantasy VIII is a very good example. You are able to summon the Gigantor. They are sometimes given facial hair to look very silly, usually mustaches, and they've also been known to take on other accessories such as hats. Now, what's very interesting, as I mentioned during this video, are the Gigantor and the Cactuar Rapido, because they have very peculiar behavior. The Gigantor, at least in Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy XIII, we can see that they either hide away from civilization and try to avoid human contact, but are very, very territorial, that if somebody seems to come up on their territory, they will attack them and try to annihilate them as quickly as possible. They don't joke around in battle, and as soon as you annoy one, they are going to try and kill you. Cactuar Rapido, on the other hand, won't even attack players, seems to simply ignore them. He just enjoys running really fast. He'll actually only attack players if they are fighting another Cactuar and he happens to run by and see them fighting. He has a very powerful 10,000 needles move, and it's very recommended that you don't try to mess with that guy alone. Now, it doesn't matter so much because the level cap's 99, but you know what I mean. Now, all of this has been said. It's great history and all, but where do they stand now in Final Fantasy XIV? What is their important role? Well, they have a general role in Final Fantasy XIV. They are mostly just the creature, the Cactuar, that we all know well. And of course, they have their other names, such as Sabotender and Cactrots, depending on where you're looking and what kind of Cactuar you're looking for. They tend to share the Final Fantasy XI model, though it's obviously been upgraded and revamped. And they seem to have the weakest form of the Needles move, known as 100 Needles, which essentially does 100 unmitigated damage. And I guess it was added to Final Fantasy XIV to counter the fact that maybe giving 1,000 Needles to the first Cactuar you run into might not be so player-friendly. And they primarily survive in the outskirts of Thanel, and just surviving, you know, it's a desert area. It's very much their type of area, and all they try to do is go out there and live, and us adventurers are going around there killing. But Cactuars can become a nuisance sometimes, usually to trade routes and things like that. So you really have to make sure to keep them under control, because, as I said, they can be very territorial. So for the sake of expanding Ul'dah and for reaping all its benefits, they tend to get in the way sometimes. But other than that, they haven't shown to play a magnificent role in Final Fantasy XIV yet. Hopefully we can get some classic creatures such as the Gigantor or the Cactuar Rapido. I would love to see some of the more popular Sabotenders and Cactuars, such as Cactuar Jack, who's already in the game, and some of the other more popular Sabotender models. But anyway, if you found this information useful, please like, favorite, subscribe, and share, especially with a friend who maybe wants to know a little bit more about the Cactuar. Also, check out my Facebook at www.facebook.com/Mr. Happy1227. You can go there and ask me what creature should I talk about next. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Until next time, take care.